Hi, I am Tarini. I am from the School of Education of Taylor's University, Malaysia. So today I'll be talking about a research that I did with my co-researcher, Ms. Hema. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it here. So our research is on the impact of COVID-19 on education for urban children living in poverty. So before that, I'd like to begin by just stating that we all know that accentuation of the significance of instruction, particularly the literacy skills among children since the beginning of their schooling journey, ought to have the ability to assist them with accomplishing, for example, a balanced lifestyle, particularly in terms of becoming a responsible citizenship and also sustaining sound and thriving relationship with a home, at work environment, and also within the community. And we know by implication this intensifies the national and economic development. So with saying that, I would like to first give you the background of my study, and I would like to start with the importance of reading because that's the core of our study. So as many of you already know, reading is a very fundamental early literacy skill, and it is one of the significant academic tasks that children embark on during their primary school. And longitudinal studies show that students who do not achieve this particular reading ability or reading skills at an early age become poor readers, and they become very less responsive towards intervention as they grow older. Study also shows that when students acquire these reading abilities at a young age, they are at an advantage which allows social mobility. It may look very simple, but it's some of the skills that our students back home struggle to achieve. So prior to the COVID-19, the world was in a learning crisis, as the World Bank have shared with us that it threatens efforts to build human capital. And the World Bank very nicely have a term for this, and it's called learning poverty. It's a very big and heavy term. There is learning there, and there's poverty there, which is already very multifaceted, as many of you already know. So this term is still at its early stage of being defined and being looked at, but at the moment it is being defined as primary school age children who are unable to read and understand a simple text by the age of 10. So let me explain to you what do I mean by a simple text here. You could be at grade 3, and if you're unable to read and understand your grade level textbooks, which is very heavily used back in my country, you are known or you are categorized to be experiencing learning poverty. So with that being said, pre-pandemic, the learning poverty was at the rate of 53%. World Bank did tell us that the efforts to eliminate it was already very slow pre-pandemic, and it was predicted to take 50 years to actually halve this percentage, and that was pre-pandemic. And with the pandemic, it has amplified this global crisis, and the schools have been off track from achieving their already intended or well thought out learning plans and learning goals. And just to give you how bad it is after the pandemic, especially in low, middle, and upper income countries, the learning poverty rate is said to be at 63, so I don't have to tell you it's definitely going to take a lot longer now to halve this, to eliminate this learning poverty. So with that, let me shift your attention to back home, where I'm coming from, Malaysia. So before the pandemic, our learning percentage by UNESCO, it was stated to be at 13% of our primary school students were experiencing learning poverty, and this number was already adjusted for out-of-school children. So might feel a bit complicated, so let me explain it again. This 13% of students make up about 300,000 primary school students who are regularly attending school, but still fail to acquire the reading ability, and they are not actively participating in their lessons at school and their learning activities. And this always leaves them with higher chances of being placed in specialized curriculum program. Back home, we call this class peralihan or remedial classes. And then they are at a higher risk of grade repetition and also higher chances of early school dropout right before probably they go to their secondary schools. And these two always prompts, intergenerational poverty and vulnerability. It just repeats and repeats and repeats. So with that being said, let's come during the pandemic, or almost to the post-pandemic era. So in Malaysia alone, during the pandemic, we had 69 weeks of school closure. This is a combination of both partial closure and also a full school closure. So how long is 69 weeks? So in a year, in a typical year, pre-pandemic, we only have 41 weeks of schooling years. And because of the pandemic, we were closed for 69 weeks. That is more than a year. If I remember correctly, in the UK, it was closed for about 27 weeks, including both partial and full lockdown of the schools. So these figures kind of justifies the findings that the Asian Development Bank came out in 2021 by saying that Malaysia has one of those highest learning losses compared to all our ASEAN members except Myanmar. So I was quite curious, why except Myanmar? Because Myanmar had 79 weeks of school closure, which is 10 more weeks compared to ours. And so this kind of triggered a lot of people to ask and look at how many students have actually dropped out during the pandemic time. So it was raised in the parliament, and we were given a figure, and it says that 21,000 students have dropped out from March 2020 to July 2021. Which many Malaysians believe it to be very underreported for political reasons, but but yeah. So we know we do not have the actual figure, but we know it's way more than that. So now let me bring you to the methodology point of view of my research. So the aim was two. The first one was to find out the children's current reading abilities, and also to find out factors that push them into learning poverty during a pandemic. So we took up the case study approach, and then we referred to the social justice framework by Tickley and Barrett, their 2011 model. So our participants were 30 children who were experiencing poverty in Malaysia. Their age ranges between 6 to 9. You may ask me why 6 to 9, because we referred back to the learning poverty definition that was given by the World Bank. It says by age 10 is where they determine whether you are in the poverty or not. So we wanted to focus on children who are before that to see if they are going to be in the learning poverty category. And 20 of their parents very kindly agreed to also participate in this study. And these families were residing in a low-cost flat in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, which is our capital city. So that's why in the title of my study we said urban poor. And their household income is actually below 2,500 ringgit Malaysia. So how much does it equivalent to a pound? That's about 480 pounds only for a family of 7 to 8 for a month. And these children were already exposed to a lot of unconducive learning environments. So just to give you a context of what sort of environment, they always, most of the time, sit in the living room to do their school homework, where the TV is always on. They have a lot of older siblings. They're very close to age, and it's always very noisy, just to give you an example. So we had two instruments in our study. The first one is reading test. This was mainly meant for the 30 children, and in order to find out their reading abilities. So we had trained our reading coaches to conduct this test, and we were very cautious. We wanted to make sure these tests were reliable and valid, because we are categorizing these children to may be experiencing learning poverty in a year or two. So we wanted to be very careful. So we made sure internal consistency by making sure these students sit for 2 different sets for the same language. So the reading test was actually test for 2 languages. Our first language, Bahasa Melayu, or the Malay language, which is our national language. The next one was English, which is the 3rd or 2nd language for some of our students. And so they sat for 2 different tests at an interval. And we also made sure we achieved the integrated reliability by having different volunteers conduct this test, so that we know that's the actual score that the child is getting for the reading test. And we ensured validity by through content validity, in terms of we made sure our tests were aligned with the curriculum that these students were learning at school, which is very closely aligned to the Common European Reference of Framework. And we also made sure we take into consideration of their learning goals and learning outcomes in the schools. And through that, we achieved the validity of generalizability. So any Malaysian primary school going children would be able to take these two tests, and we will be able to determine their reading abilities. The next one was semi-structured interviews. It was participated by the 20 parents, and just to give you a demographic of them, they are somewhere between their 30s, mid-30s to 40s. They're pretty young parents, and they are native Malays. So what do I mean by native Malays? They make up the majority of the Malaysian population. So they belong to that group, and they had multiple odd jobs that comes with a lot of uncertainty. Very less percentage of our parents belong to one profession. So just to give you a perspective of how their life might be during the pandemic. And these semi-structured interviews were carried out through phone. We were unable to meet the parents in person, so it was a phone interview. And some of these questions were predetermined, obviously, because it's a semi-structured. So these questions were around the themes of the impact of COVID-19, their experience of having children learning from home for the first time, and also its challenges. And the rest took the flow of the conversation that we were having with the parents. So let's move on to the major portion of my presentation, which is my findings. Sadly, but not very surprisingly, 22 out of our 30 children were unable to read and understand a simple text that was given to them. The text was, like I said, it was at their grade level, but 22 of them were unable to read and understand what it meant. They were unable to understand the comprehension question. They were unable to answer it. As for the factors, the first one is definitely resource divide that popped the most. And under the resource divide, most parents told us it's the sharing of gadgets among the siblings that actually really pushed them into the learning poverty category. So they are already coming from a very low-income family, and at that point of the pandemic, the governments were giving away some gadgets, but to selected families, so not all families got it. So it's now in the parents' hand to kind of secure a device for the learning, and it's usually a second-hand phone that either had issue with the screen or a issue with the speaker. And these parents were also put into a very difficult position of choosing which of their child would be getting that one device that the 7 to 8 siblings are sharing. And the parents told us that it's usually the older ones, obviously because they require very less intervention from their parents, so they will just leave the parents alone. The second one is because it's either they're sitting for the national exam that year or the following year or the year after, so they thought the education for the 6 to 9-year-old can take a back seat during the pandemic. The next one is this unconducive learning environment. Even though I've mentioned earlier, it did pop out a lot during our findings. So a low-cost flat in Malaysia, how big is it? It's about 640 to 680 square feet, which might be bigger for some European countries, but for back home, it's not. And it's accommodating about 6 to 8 or 9 family members. So these children were confined to almost limited to no personal space. And very surprisingly, we found out that they had this job of taking care of younger siblings who are just 1-year-old or months old. If you ask me, 6 to 9-year-old, you're already a baby or a child or a toddler or a child, and you are taking care of your younger sibling. And of course, when at one time all the family members are at home, so of course you had a lot of housework to do, helping mommy, preparing dinner. It's just repeats and repeats. The next one is, because of the above two factors, they were actually received little to no preschool or early primary education. And this is a very important factor to understand, because when they went back to the school after the 69 weeks of school closure, our curriculum did not adjust for the learning loss that these students have incurred. So you may have missed year 1 and year 2. That's how we call it back home. So here would be grade 1 and grade 2. So when you go to grade 3, the teacher expects, or the curriculum expects you that you are ready for grade 3. Actually, in real time, you're not. And you are put further behind your peers from middle-income families who have very closely followed the lesson during online time. So that, for me, when I discovered this, it really took me some time to comprehend it, how badly it's going to affect this child in the future if we are not going to adjust our curriculum for the learning losses and we're just going to ignore it. So moving on, the last one is the parents' low literacy and digital skills. So they were already having the issue of income. They were very limited to internet connectivity. So when the data runs off, that's it. You no longer learn. Nobody learns that day. Everyone goes off to do their own things, right? So on top of that, because of their own parental education background, they were unable to support. Even if the child, let's say for that day, he sits through and follows the lesson with the teacher, the parents are unable to support the homework. And so one of the parents told me, I was put into a WhatsApp group where the teacher was giving me so many instruction and direction on what apps to download, where to upload the finished work, and how to receive feedback, and I did not understand. I don't use smartphones. I've never used it in my life. I got it because of the pandemic, and I have to heavily depend on my older child to actually guide me, and it always ends up in friction. So with that being said, we truly hope that our findings contribute to the discussion on the impact of COVID-19 on pandemic on education, learning for children from disadvantaged home, and especially the importance of addressing learning poverty in countries such as Malaysia, because only through reading, you kind of come out of it, you break your cycle. There is a motto that me and my mentor, co-researcher really believe in. Only when you learn to read, you can read to learn. So with that, we are more than happy to receive more feedbacks. If you have adjusted for the learning losses, please do share with us. If there's any framework that you're looking at to suggest to your own schools, your teachers, teacher training, please do share it with us. It will be very useful. We would love to look at it. So I'm looking forward to engaging in more conversations with all of you. Thank you so much.
Is it Tharani? I got that right.
Tharani, yes.
Tharani. I was just wondering, when you spoke to the parents, whether they had any insights as to what would have been helpful to them, what could have made things easier for them, or what could have helped the children, you know? Did they talk about anything like that?
These parents were already very much in the state of, like, they were thinking, how do I feed my child?
Yeah.
Especially during a pandemic. So education was always taking a backseat. So it was us who were repeatedly telling these parents, like, no, you have to make sure your child reads, because he is going to go back. This pandemic is going to come to an end. We are going to go back, and the life is going to get back to normal. But there were, of course, few parents who wanted one-to-one support, because they are unable to support. The oldest, some of them didn't have older siblings. These kids are the first ones in their family. So they did one-to-one support. So we have actually created a program that actually supports one-to-one. We created like a volunteer-based program where we recruit 100 volunteers from all over Malaysia. We pair them up with these children, and they read with their volunteers twice a week, 1:30 minutes for English and 1:30 minutes for Malay, just so that you have someone. And it has come to that point, because we don't want to just talk about it. We really want to do something, and we know that if we want the school to do something, the curriculum to change is going to take a very long time, and the learning loss is going to get bigger and wider, and we have to do something about it. So through that, we created a program called Program Baca Baca. The motto is learn to read, read to learn. So we do have that at the moment, and the parents are very appreciative of that. So some parents do want to help, but sometimes it takes a backseat, because feeding the child comes first, keeping them safe comes first. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for that. That was fantastic. So I've been doing some work on digital inequality in Australia. So it hasn't been particularly focused on education, but it has been focused on the experience of households in low economic housing. And one of the things that came through for us wasn't just the device that was the problem, having, you know, one device that works and one device that doesn't work. It was the bandwidth, the amount of internet they could actually access. So, for example, we had examples of families of 8 people living in the flat and having to take turns to use their device because they couldn't all go on Zoom at the same time, or they, you know, lost connection and so on. I'm wondering if the similar thing was happening in your
Absolutely.
context.
Yeah. Everyone had school from 8 to 12 or 8 to 2, all 8 or 7 of their children. So, and they have one device. So even because during the pandemic, I myself was teaching in an international school, which is very different from the government school, and the same happened. I worked with a parent, and that parent had 3 kids, and all of them have to log in at the same time, and the mom was running here, running there, running here, because she needs to guide. So yeah, it's the same in Malaysia. It was very interesting for me when I was listening to the doctor's conversation, because right before the session I was talking to her, because she has done some work on reading as well. So we cannot stress the importance of reading, because then sadly reading is not a very famous habit in our country. And I have a fellow friend here from Malaysia. You know, we don't really read, right? It's not the nation that reads. So we don't really teach that to our children. So from the very beginning, reading chapter books at a particular age, or reading good old folk stories at a particular age, it's not very much stressed. So I know here there is a reading time in your school timetable, and when I studied, I didn't have such thing. So when I went to teach in an international school, my principal told me, she's from York, she told me, Darren, you have to conduct reading lessons. What do you mean? Once a week? No, every day, 45 minutes, we're going to read. Because there's no point I teach mathematical skills, I teach scientific skills if you're unable to read. Because you don't understand the question, you don't know what to apply if you don't know how to read. So a lot of changes need to be made in my country, and it's very well aware. Most of the scholars there are very well aware, but you know, only through conference like this we kind of get to hear more from how ahead some of the countries are compared to ours, and how much work we need to do back home to actually bring our students to a certain point where the field becomes a level playing, right? Have any of you here have worked with anyone where you need to look at learning losses? Anybody? Yeah?
I'm from here, but I work in California now, and we had, as have we all, challenges before the pandemic. And so although these might be unfounded propositions, word on the street is, should we introduce another year of schooling, tack it on to the end of high school? That's, I don't know how that will impact our little ones, but we've got a lot of missing in action children because of this that we're having to track. That was in another talk, not one of mine, but that was mentioned here. And sheer poverty before the pandemic. So the gap is widening, and as you're mentioning here, not mentioning, you're researching here young children, it's so much more than just content they've missed. And I don't want to belittle the older children's challenges. Some content you can say, okay, we'll miss that, we'll skip that, let's move on. But all the socialization that's happened, I can say in a sentence, in Southern California, children are going into first grade with very little understanding of what any kind of literacy is. They missed out preschool, they missed out kindergarten, and huge gaps. So I'm going to quote my PhD supervisor, who's now retired, Tricia David, who said, up until the age of 5, no human being goes through such a change as that period. So our children up to 5, and then yours, 6 to 9. The gap is just going to widen. So I'm sorry I don't have a question. I'm thrilled to be here and hear your work. knowing that we're all in the same boat and it's how we're all going to deal with it. So thank you for your work.
Thank you so much. And I truly hope more research comes out of this learning poverty, because as much as because my background is accounting and finance, so I have the love for math, but before I teach someone how to do math and science, it all comes back to reading. So that's why we really want to focus on this, and we hope more work is done, because we don't have enough work in this particular term yet to even refer it to our country, because it's usually the UK, the US, some of the European Union sets the base, and then we kind of adopt, and then we kind of go from that. So even now, we are trying to see who's willing to collaborate, who's willing to do more work on this, because we need more evidence on this in order to come up with a framework. Because as much as I talk to some of my parents, they are thrilled to help now, because there's a little bit of stability. The kids are back to school, so everyone have taken a very deep breath, like, okay, it looks like, masks are off and life is back to somewhat normal. So they want some sort of framework, especially after being part of my program. They say, please teach me. Actually looks like I may be able to help my child. It only takes 30 minutes to sit with my child to read. Maybe I could I was talking to a doctor, and she was telling me how the parent relationship with the child changes when you sit during the reading time. Maybe, doctor, you can share more about that.
Is this work? Yeah, we were talking about some intervention programs, including an intervention program which was developed at the University of Oxford here in the UK, which we trialed a few years ago, compared to a behavioral intervention program. These are parent training programs which are supposed to... The Incredible Years one, which you might be familiar with, which is an American program, which actually worked quite well for reading, supporting children's reading. So the idea is that you support the parent, you support the child with their behavior, but this one worked for children's reading. But the literacy intervention, which was meant to support parents to support their children's literacy, actually improved the child and parents' behavior a lot, because we found that parents started spending a lot more time than they used to during shared reading. It wasn't very successful, though, when it comes to improving children's reading, because in that case you might have to be more actively pursuing their phonics, as well as, of course, supporting the child's reading. Yeah.
That's why I told her that I will definitely contact her to get some frameworks out of it, so that I can introduce to my parents back home, because now we really want reading to be part of our curriculum, and we want to do it daily, get our students reading, because we come from a multi-ethnic nation. So my national language is Malay. I speak English because it's my secondary language, but my mother tongue is Tamil. I also speak that. So there are so many things a child needs to get used to learn before they even go to year one. I have a nephew. He doesn't speak a word of Tamil. I asked my brother, why didn't you teach your child Tamil? Not in a very condescending manner, but I was just curious from a researcher's point of view. He told me, because in his play school, they speak in English, and I want to make his life easy. So let me just speak to the child in English, so that when he goes back, he knows how to socialize, he knows how to listen to instruction, not get into trouble, get through play school, so that when time comes, I will teach him his mother tongue. So now learning language is already so complex. Now reading is also within that. And I have listened to a lot of really, really fascinating research here. Yesterday I was in one with the Global Citizenship as a Pedagogy of Hope. It was so complex, but it was so fascinating and beautiful. And I want back home my students to be part of value-based learning and learner-centered learning. And how do we get through all this? Get them to read first, so that they can kind of, go on and learn so many things on their own. So.
May I just add to this one, in terms of supporting parents to support their children's reading, that we also have to be very mindful of the parents' mental health. Mm-hmm. We really have to support. We found in our qualitative study that the mothers who did not cope for a number of reasons, including being very distressed, they just gave up with homeschooling. They said, I can't do this. So they prioritized mental health and well-being for the family, obviously, and for the children. So this is very, very important. It is interesting that, at least as far as the UK is concerned, maternal mental health is not looked at as, at least as far as the national health system is concerned, is not approached as, if you like, a condition on of its own. Which is a bit of a shame. And then you have all this online support about mindfulness, and you don't really want to do that because you need some practical support as well as. So these are some important. Potentially, we need to consider supporting children's education through supporting maternal well-being and considering through an inequalities sort of perspective.
Great. Yes.
In unpaid work.
Yesterday, I was listening to one presentation where it talked about the parent-child relationship and how it has changed in the times of COVID. And it was very UK-based, and the parents, some really appreciated, and some were very relieved that the child went back to school. And I wonder how my parent, going through 69 weeks of school closure and homeschooling their child, how would they feel? I'm curious to know, would they have any sort of appreciation towards it? Or would they be respecting teachers more now because they have done it for 69 weeks? Yeah. So I think if there is no more comment, I think we all can go and have our lunch on our last day here. So it was really wonderful to have a few of you here, and I hope we gave you some insightful findings from our research, and very nice to meet all of you here. So yeah,
Thank you. Very nice to meet all of you.
Yeah, thank you.